Last year, insurers denied 31% of all emergency room claims. But for one father, the rejection came before the bill, when a night shift nurse refused to even look at his feverish son because of a missing insurance card. Security was called to remove them. What happened next would expose a secret that reshaped the entire hospital, turning a moment of humiliation into one of unimaginable reckoning. The father was Liam Walsh, a single dad working 2 jobs, holding his 5-year-old son Ben, who was burning up with a fever of 104. Their story exposes the brutal gap between a federal law designed to protect patients and the cold reality of what happens in waiting rooms every night. This is what occurs when the system judges a book by its cover and misses the dedication page written in silent millions. For Liam Walsh, every day was a calculation. His construction job started at 7 a.m. and his evening shift as a stocker ended at midnight, all to keep the lights on and his son, Ben, in a decent school district. The math was simple: work equals survival. But on that Wednesday night, a new variable entered the equation, a fever that broke through children's Tylenol like it was nothing. Liam had lost his employer-sponsored health insurance 8 months prior when the small contracting firm he worked for downsized. The cost of a marketplace plan was a figure that belonged to a different universe, one where groceries and rent didn't consume every dollar. He was in the coverage gap, earning too much for Medicaid, too little for private insurance. Ben's pediatrician visits were paid for in cash, a draining but manageable expense. An emergency room, however, was a financial avalanche he'd been desperately avoiding. Across town, Mercy General Hospital's emergency department was entering its own nightly calculus. The night shift charge nurse, Rebecca Vance, was 3 hours into a 12-hour marathon. The department was at 120% capacity, ambulances queued at the bay. Every bed was full, every curtain drawn, a symphony of beeping monitors and low groans. Rebecca's primary metric, drilled into her by monthly management meetings, was throughput, moving patients in and out as efficiently as possible. Uninsured patients were a notorious bottleneck. They required social work consults, lengthy financial counseling, and often left with unpaid bills that the hospital would eventually swallow. The pressure to subtly prioritize insured cases was an unspoken rule, a survival tactic for a department drowning in red ink. This was the reality hiding behind a federal law called EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. Passed in 1986, it was a direct response to the scandal of patient dumping, where hospitals were caught transferring uninsured patients in unstable condition to public facilities. The law was clear: any hospital that participates in Medicare, which is nearly all of them, must provide a medical screening exam to anyone who comes to their emergency department, regardless of their insurance status or ability to pay. Treatment cannot be delayed to ask about payment. But here's the crucial gap: the law mandates the screening, but it doesn't guarantee timely care after that. A backlogged ER can make an uninsured person wait for hours while insured patients are seen, a form of passive denial that operates in the shadows of protocol. Ben's fever had climbed to 104.2. His small body was shivering violently under 2 blankets, his breathing quick and shallow. The wait-and-see approach Liam had clung to shattered. This was no longer calculation, it was a primal directive. He wrapped Ben in a blanket, grabbed his worn wallet, knowing it held his driver's license and a void where an insurance card should be, and carried his son to the car. The Mercy General ER waiting room at 11 p.m. was a cross-section of silent suffering. A man held a blood-soaked towel to his hand. An elderly woman coughed wetly into a mask. A teenager stared blankly at a muted television. Liam approached the triage window, his son a dead weight in his arms. The clerk behind the glass didn't look up. Name and insurance. "I don't, my son. He has a really high fever. He's 5, he's burning up," Liam stammered, bypassing the question. The clerk sighed, a practiced sound of minor inconvenience. "I need an insurance card to start the check-in process, sir." "I don't have one right now. Please, can someone just look at him?" A different face appeared at the window, older, sharper, with the tired eyes of someone who has seen every version of this plea. This was Rebecca Vance. Her gaze flickered from Liam's anxious face to Ben's flushed one, then down to the intake screen, still blank in the insurance field. The protocol was clear, but so was the departmental pressure. An uninsured pediatric case meant hours of resources with near-certain financial loss. "He needs to be seen," Liam said, his voice cracking. "He will be," Rebecca replied, her tone professionally flat. "After you complete registration, we need insurance information to proceed. If you don't have a card, we'll need a $100 deposit to initiate the screening exam." Liam's stomach dropped. He had $27 in his account until Friday. The demand for payment before treatment was, on its face, a direct violation of EMTALA. But in the chaotic, understaffed trench of the ER, the law often collided with hospital policy, and policy usually won. This was the system's first filter, designed to deter exactly people like Liam. "But the law says you have to screen him first," Liam argued, a fragment of knowledge he'd picked up from a late-night internet search during a previous scare. Rebecca's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm not having a legal debate with you. No insurance, no deposit, you wait. Take a seat. We'll call you when there's availability." She turned away from the window, her focus returning to her computer screen, where the names of patients with verified Blue Cross and Aetna plans glowed helpfully. Liam stood frozen, humiliation and terror warring inside him. The other waiting patients avoided his eyes. He carried Ben to a hard plastic chair, rocking him gently. Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity measured in Ben's increasingly labored breaths. Liam watched as two other patients who arrived after them were called back, one flashing a sleek insurance card, the other explaining a workman's comp case. The triage system had its own invisible algorithm, and Liam and Ben were at the absolute bottom. After 45 minutes, Ben began to cry weakly, a sound that was more whimper than wail. Liam marched back to the window. "He's getting worse. You have to help him, now." Rebecca emerged from the triage door this time, her posture rigid. "Sir, you need to calm down. You are disrupting the waiting area. I told you the procedure." "The procedure is killing my son," Liam's shout echoed off the linoleum floors. Heads turned. A security guard near the entrance straightened up. "That's it," Rebecca said, her voice cold with finality. She pointed to the guard. "Security, this patient is being aggressive and refusing to comply with registration. They need to be escorted out." This was the moment the Hook described, the ultimate failure of the system, not just a delay, but an active expulsion. The guard, a large man with a kind but resigned face, approached. "Sir, you're going to have to leave. You can try another hospital." Liam clutched Ben to his chest, backing away, a cornered animal. The other patients looked on, a mixture of pity and relief that the disruption was being handled. This was the cliffhanger, the point of maximum despair. But as the security guard reached for Liam's arm, a new voice cut through the tension, loud and frantic. "Stop, stand down now." All heads swiveled. Sprinting down the corridor from the administrative wing, his tie flying over his shoulder, was David Chen, the hospital's director. His face was pale, not with anger, but with pure, undiluted panic. He skidded to a halt between Liam and the security guard, his chest heaving. He looked not at the guard, not at Nurse Vance, but directly at Liam Walsh. And with a deference that made the entire waiting room fall utterly silent, he said the words that would detonate the entire narrative. "Mr. Walsh, Liam, thank God, please come with me, we'll take care of Ben immediately. And I am so profoundly sorry. The entire pediatric wing, we had no idea it was you." The silence in the waiting room was absolute, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights and Ben's ragged breathing. Every person, the bleeding man, the coughing woman, the stunned security guard, was trying to parse the hospital director's impossible statement. "The entire pediatric wing," Rebecca Vance repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language, her professional mask crumbling into pure confusion. David Chen ignored her. He placed a hand on Liam's back, not as an authority figure, but as a guide. "This way, right now. I've already called a pediatric team to the resuscitation bay." He shot a look at the frozen security guard. "Stand down. Assist anyone else who needs it." The guard retreated, his face a canvas of bewilderment. Liam, operating on pure paternal instinct, let himself be led through the double doors, leaving the stagnant air of the waiting room for the bright, chaotic hallway of the ER proper. Nurses and orderlies stopped mid-stride, staring at the unprecedented sight of the hospital director personally escorting a patient in a worn hoodie past triage, past the waiting line of curtained beds, straight into the most critical care area. In the resuscitation bay, a team was indeed waiting. A doctor took Ben from Liam's arms with a gentle urgency, placing him on a gowned bed. Monitors were attached, an IV was started, and a cooling pad was applied. The speed and efficiency were breathtaking. Liam stood against the wall, feeling like a ghost in his own crisis. David Chen stayed beside him, speaking in a low, rapid tone. They're running tests for bacterial meningitis and severe sepsis. We're giving him broad-spectrum antibiotics and fluids immediately. He's in the best hands. Liam could only nod, his eyes glued to his son. Then, the director's words from the waiting room finally penetrated the fog of his panic. He turned to David Chen, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What did you mean about the pediatric wing?" David Chen's expression was one of profound, almost comical distress. "You're Liam Walsh, the anonymous donor, the WW from the Walsh family wing, plaque we've had in storage for 3 years because you insisted on absolute anonymity." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "We've been trying to find a way to thank you for a $35 million donation that saved our pediatric oncology unit from closing. And instead, my staff tried to throw you out of my emergency room." The pieces, wild and impossible, began to click into a devastating picture. 3 years ago, after the sale of his first tech startup, Liam had made the single largest charitable gift of his life. It was an act of memorial and hope, channeling his own grief into a fortress for other people's children. He had demanded total secrecy, funneling the money through a blind trust. He wanted no plaques, no galas, no recognition. The hospital knew the donation came from a WW and had a lawyer's contact information. They had never seen his face. "Then how did you know it was me?" Liam asked, still reeling. "Your driver's license," David said, his voice heavy with irony. "When the clerk finally entered your name into the system for the incident report, it triggered a flag in our development office database. A major donor alert. My phone started buzzing while I was in a budget meeting. I saw your name and the location, emergency department, and I ran." In the space of 10 minutes, Liam's identity had been completely rewritten. In the eyes of the system, he had gone from a financial liability to the institution's most vital patron. The shift was vertigo-inducing. Across the ER, Rebecca Vance was experiencing a different kind of vertigo. A nursing supervisor had quietly relieved her of duty and escorted her to an empty administrative office. "Wait here, Rebecca. The director and the head of risk management will be in to speak with you." The door clicked shut, leaving her alone with the sterile hum of the air conditioner and the dawning, catastrophic understanding of what she had done. She replayed the interaction at the triage window, the man's desperation, his son's feverish face, her own automatic weary dismissal. The $100 deposit policy was real, but it was meant for non-urgent cases, a filter for sprains and minor cuts. A child with a fever of 104 was, by any triage protocol, an emergency. She had let the pressure of the night, the ingrained bias against the uninsured, and her own frustration override her nursing judgment. She had violated the core tenet of her profession, and as she now understood, the federal law she'd vaguely heard about in a continuing education module. And she had done it to the man who paid her salary, who funded the very department she worked in. The personal stakes were one layer. The institutional earthquake was just beginning. By morning, the incident was no longer a confidential personnel matter. A medical intern, horrified by what they'd witnessed from the nurse's station, had posted a vague but incendiary account on a private social media group. Tonight at Mercy General, a single dad and his super sick kid got turned away for no insurance. Security was called. Then the director sprinted in like his hair was on fire and practically carried them to the back. "Whispers say the dad is someone. What is happening here?" The post was screenshotted. It spread. By 7 a.m., local news producers had the tip. By 9, 2 investigative reporters were making calls to the hospital's communications department, which was frantically trying to craft a response without the full story from David Chen, who was still at the hospital overseeing Ben's care. Ben's condition had stabilized. The diagnosis was a severe bacterial pneumonia that had entered his bloodstream. The doctors said the first hour of aggressive treatment was critical. The delay in the waiting room had used up precious minutes of that window. Liam, sitting by his sleeping son's bedside in the pristine, state-of-the-art pediatric intensive care unit, a unit that bore his family's invisible name, felt a fury so cold it burned. David Chen found him there. The director looked like he hadn't slept. "Mr. Walsh, Liam, on behalf of Mercy General, I offer our deepest, most sincere apology. What happened was a systemic failure and a profound breach of our ethical and legal obligations. The nurse involved has been suspended. We are conducting a full internal review." Liam didn't look away from Ben. "Is she being fired?" "The review will determine appropriate disciplinary action." "I want her fired." Liam's voice was flat. "She looked at my son and saw a balance sheet. She endangered his life." David Chen hesitated. "That may be the outcome, but there are complexities, the nurses' union, potential legal challenges, and the optics of firing a frontline healthcare worker after a single incident, even a grave one, during a staffing crisis." Liam finally turned to him. "You're worried about optics? What do you think the optics are of the man who gave you $35 million, nearly losing his son because your hospital asked for $100 first?" It was the question that would define the coming storm. David Chen had no answer. The story broke at noon. A local news website ran the headline, "Anonymous Hospital Donor denied care for son due to missing insurance card." It had everything: hidden wealth, healthcare inequity, a dramatic twist, and a sick child. By 3 p.m. it was national news. Cable news panels debated it. Social media erupted. The hashtag #HypocrisyGeneral trended. Comment sections were battlefields between those condemning the nurse's cruelty and those blaming hospital administration for impossible working conditions. Rebecca Vance, sitting in her silent apartment with her phone turned off, was being eviscerated online as the face of a broken system. Memes were made. Her professional photo from the hospital's website was shared thousands of times with captions like "judge, jury, and executioner." But the story had a second, more damaging thread for the hospital: the revelation of the deposit policy. Legal experts went on air to explain that demanding payment before a screening exam was a clear, actionable violation of EMTALA. The hospital wasn't just facing a public relations nightmare. It was staring down the barrel of a federal investigation and millions in potential fines. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting via video conference. The pressure was coming from all sides: donors threatening to pull funding, lawyers advising a swift settlement, the state health department announcing an inquiry. The board's primary concern was containment. Their proposed solution, presented to David Chen, was a brutal piece of corporate calculus. Publicly fire Rebecca Vance, announce the termination of the deposit policy, and offer a generous financial settlement to Liam Walsh, contingent on his signing a non-disclosure agreement. David Chen was tasked with presenting this deal. He found Liam in the family lounge, drinking terrible coffee. Ben was out of imminent danger and resting comfortably. The worst of the physical crisis had passed, leaving room for the moral and legal one to fully bloom. David laid out the board's offer: a 7-figure settlement, a public apology, and the nurse's termination. All Liam had to do was agree that the matter was resolved and not speak about it publicly again. Liam listened in silence. Then he asked a simple question: "If I wasn't the donor, what would your offer be?" David Chen blinked. "I'm not sure I follow." "If my name hadn't triggered that alert, if I was just Liam Walsh, the construction worker with no insurance, and my son had been turned away and gotten sicker or worse in your waiting room, what would you have offered me then?" The director's silence was the most eloquent answer he could have given. For an ordinary person, the process would have been a complaint filed, maybe an internal review, a form letter of apology. No settlement, No guaranteed policy change. The nurse might have received a note in her file. Liam stood up. That's what I thought. So no NDA, no quiet settlement, and you will not make that nurse the sole villain for a problem you created. This was the major pivot. The easy narrative, the cruel nurse versus the wronged philanthropist, was collapsing. Liam was refusing to be a pawn in the hospital's damage control playbook. He was turning the spotlight away from the individual and onto the structure itself, the policies and pressures that made Rebecca Vance's decision not an anomaly, but a predictable outcome. David Chen, a man who had spent his career navigating institutional politics, felt the ground shift beneath him. Liam, what are you asking for? I want a meeting, Liam said, his tech CEO persona emerging, analytical and relentless. You, me, the head of the nurses' union, your board chair, and a patient advocate. We're going to dissect exactly how your system failed, and then we're going to redesign it, not just for donors, for everyone. He was no longer just a grieving father or a generous benefactor. He was becoming a revolutionary from the inside, using his accidental leverage to force a change that would affect every single person who walked through those doors. But as he laid down his terms, he had no idea that Rebecca Vance, isolated and desperate, was already taking a drastic step of her own that would pour gasoline on the fire and push the entire crisis toward a point of no return. Rebecca Vance did not wait to be fired. At 2 a.m., alone in her apartment, she logged into her personal email and began typing. She wasn't writing a resignation or a defense. She was compiling a dossier. Subject line, for the record. She attached every memo, every email, every slide from management meetings for the past 18 months that mentioned revenue cycle, uncompensated care deterrence, and triage protocols for self-pay patients. Then she hit send, not to the hospital board, but to the two investigative reporters who had broken the story. The journalists received the files as dawn broke. What they found was not the story of one rogue nurse, but a blueprint for systemic discrimination. PowerPoint slides from a presentation to department heads explicitly linked insurance status verification speed to improved departmental financial performance. Internal emails discussed soft steering uninsured patients toward the public county hospital by emphasizing long wait times. Most damning was a policy memo, never made public, titled Financial Triage Guidelines, which instructed registration staff to initiate payment conversation at first contact and escalate to clinical lead if patient exhibits reluctance or inability to pay. This was the hospital's own paper trail, proving the pressure on Rebecca Vance was not an isolated incident, but a mandated, top-down strategy. The story exploded again, this time with nuclear force. The headline, Mercy General's Secret Playbook, turning away the uninsured was policy, not an accident. The news cycle shifted from vilifying a nurse to indicting an entire institution. The state health department announced it was expanding its inquiry into a full investigation. The Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services opened a case to review the hospital's compliance with EMTALA, threatening its Medicare funding, a death sentence for any hospital. Inside Mercy General, panic turned to paralysis. The board of directors, realizing containment had failed catastrophically, had no choice but to agree to Liam's demand for a meeting. They hoped to negotiate a truce that would stop the bleeding. The meeting was set for 4 days later in a sterile hospital conference room. The attendees were a portrait of a shattered system, David Chen, looking 10 years older, Elena Grave, the steely board chairwoman, Maria Rodriguez, the fiery head of the nurses' union, Liam Walsh, with a patient advocate named Anya at his side, and via video call from her lawyer's office, Rebecca Vance. The atmosphere was ice. Elena Grave opened with a prepared statement of regret and a pledge to review policies. Liam cut her off. We're not here for press releases. We are here for the truth. Start with the financial triage guidelines. Who wrote them? A tense silence followed. David Chen finally spoke. They were drafted by the former chief financial officer in consultation with outside revenue cycle consultants. They were intended for non-urgent cases. Show me the document where it says non-urgent, Liam challenged. David could not. The memo, as leaked, made no such distinction. It was a blanket policy. Maria Rodriguez, the union head, leaned forward. For 18 months, my nurses have been telling administration that these pressures are creating unsafe conditions and moral injury. We were told to focus on throughput and efficiency. Rebecca is not a villain. She is a symptom. You put her in an impossible position, break the law or fail your performance metrics. Rebecca's face on the monitor was pale but composed. I made a terrible clinical error, she said, her voice clear. I own that, but I made it inside a system that rewarded me for making that exact kind of error. I was following the protocol I was given. This was the crucial reframing. The narrative was now a three-way collision: the hospital's greed, the union's defense of a broken workforce, and Liam's demand for justice. Then came the wait, it gets worse moment. Anya, the patient advocate, who had been quietly reviewing a stack of data, pushed a sheet of paper toward the center of the table. I've been analyzing your own emergency department data from the past year, obtained through a public records request. It shows that patients marked as self-pay or unverified insurance waited an average of 47 minutes longer for a medical screening exam than patients with verified private insurance. For pediatric cases, the gap was 62 minutes. How do you explain that if your policy was only for non-urgent cases? The room froze again. This was the statistical proof of the harm, the human cost translated into cold, unimpeachable numbers. The delay for Liam and Ben was not an outlier, it was the average. Elena Grave, the board chair, looked at the data, then at David Chen, her expression betraying a hint of betrayal. David, were you aware of these metrics? David Chen closed his eyes for a moment. I was aware of wait time disparities. I was told they were due to the complexity of uninsured cases requiring more administrative work. That's a lie, Maria Rodriguez shot back. It's due to the registration bottleneck you created. The clerk can't start the clinical triage process until the financial triage is complete. It's a literal queue where the poor wait at the back. The meeting descended into a heated unraveling of corporate double-talk. Liam watched, his initial anger hardening into a focused resolve. He saw the board's primary concern was still liability and reputation, not transformation. Stood up, quieting the room. Here's what's going to happen. You will immediately and permanently rescind the financial triage guidelines. You will publicly apologize not just to me, but to every patient who has been affected by this policy. You will create a patient oversight committee with real power, co-chaired by the union and patient advocates. And you will fund an independent audit of every EMTALA complaint you've received in the past 5 years, with the results made public. Elena Grave balked. An independent audit that could expose us to tremendous financial risk. That's the point, Liam said. You need to feel the risk you've been passing on to your patients. The board refused. They would change the policy, they would apologize to Liam, but an independent audit was a bridge too far. It could trigger dozens of lawsuits and federal penalties they might not survive. The meeting reached a stalemate. As it broke up, David Chen pulled Liam aside. They'll never agree to the audit. It's corporate suicide. Then maybe the corporation should die, Liam replied and walked out. He now faced a choice: accept the partial victory or escalate to a war he had the unique power to wage. That night, sitting by Ben's bedside as his son slept peacefully in the million-dollar wing he'd funded, Liam made a decision. He called his lawyer and the head of the blind trust that managed his donation. The next morning, Mercy General Hospital received a formal letter from the trust's attorneys. It cited a clause in the donation agreement that allowed for the rescinding of funds if the hospital engaged in conduct materially contrary to its public health mission. The letter stated that the hospital's EMTALA violations and discriminatory policies constituted such conduct. It demanded the return of the $35 million donation within 30 days, or the trust would initiate litigation to claw it back. It was a financial torpedo aimed at the hospital's hull. The media, catching wind of the legal maneuver, dubbed it the nuclear option. The public was riveted. Could a donor take back a gift? The legal experts said it was unprecedented, but the clause was ironclad. The board was thrown into total disarray. The return of the donation would bankrupt the pediatric wing expansion and likely force the hospital into merger or closure. They had 30 days to choose: submit to a full, transparent overhaul under Liam's terms, or face financial ruin and the permanent stigma of having their largest benefactor declare them morally bankrupt. Liam Walsh had transformed from a victim to a reformer to an executioner. He held the ultimate leverage, but wielding it meant potentially destroying the very institution that served his community. He had forced the crisis to its absolute peak. Now, everyone was waiting for the final, devastating fallout. The clock was ticking, and the next move would determine whether this story ended in reform or in ruins. The $35 million ultimatum created a fault line straight through Mercy General's boardroom. On one side, the old guard, arguing they could fight the donation recall in court for years, that Liam Walsh was bluffing. On the other, realists who knew that even if they won legally, the public relations carnage would leave the hospital a hollow brand. The deciding vote came from an unlikely source: the hospital's largest creditor, who called the chairwoman to say their continued financing was contingent on immediate reputational repair. The board folded. 23 days after the demand letter was sent, the hospital announced a sweeping settlement. They agreed to every one of Liam's terms. The financial triage guidelines were not just rescinded, they were publicly shredded in a press conference. A new patient-first registration protocol was implemented, designed by a committee of nurses, doctors, and patient advocates. No mention of payment was permitted until after a medical screening exam was complete. The hospital issued a formal, public apology, not only to Liam and Ben Walsh, but to the community, acknowledging a systemic failure of our mission. Most significantly, they agreed to the independent audit of all EMTALA complaints from the past 5 years. A nationally recognized healthcare ethics firm was hired, given unfettered access, and its report would be released publicly, regardless of findings. The consequences began to ripple out immediately. The head of the emergency department resigned. The former CFO who authored the original guidelines retired early. The state health department, working with the federal investigators, used the hospital's agreement as a template for new, stricter oversight rules for all hospitals in the state, focusing on wait time disparities. But the most personal consequence was for Rebecca Vance. She was not fired. The union fought for her, and Liam, in a controversial move, did not oppose it. Instead, she accepted a negotiated resolution. She would be demoted from charge nurse, required to complete extensive retraining in medical ethics and EMTALA law, and placed on probation for 2 years. She also agreed to participate in the hospital's new training program, sharing her story as a case study in how systemic pressure can lead to catastrophic individual error. For the first time, she publicly apologized to Liam and Ben, a moment captured by the media where she wept, and Liam stoically nodded acceptance. The audit results, when they came 6 months later, were explosive. They found that Mercy General had likely violated EMTALA provisions in at least 17 documented cases over the previous 3 years, most involving uninsured or underinsured patients. The hospital faced a federal fine of $2.3 million, a painful but survivable penalty. More importantly, the public report became a landmark document, cited by healthcare reformers across the country as evidence of hidden triage based on wealth. Liam Walsh did not take his $35 million back. Once the hospital capitulated, he and the trust restructured the gift. $25 million remained to fund the pediatric wing, now officially named the Walsh Family Wing. The remaining $10 million was used to endow a permanent, independent patient advocate office at the hospital, with the power to investigate complaints and halt discriminatory policies. The office was given a seat on the hospital's Quality Oversight Board. Liam had turned his donation from a static gift into a dynamic instrument for change. Ben made a full recovery. The pneumonia left no lasting damage. Father and son returned to their life, but nothing was the same. Liam sold his second startup and pivoted his career entirely. He founded the Walsh Integrity in Care Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding EMTALA compliance monitors and legal aid for patients who faced similar discrimination. He became an unlikely but powerful voice in health policy, testifying before state legislatures about the human cost of financial triage. The story seemed to have reached its conclusion. A wrong was righted, reforms were made, the hero used his power for good. But then came the final, surprising detail, one that reframed the entire ordeal. A year after the crisis, David Chen announced his retirement as hospital director. At his farewell speech, he revealed a private correspondence. During the darkest days of the scandal, he had received a handwritten letter from Rebecca Vance. In it, she didn't ask for her job back or make excuses. Instead, she included a detailed proposal for a new training simulation for triage nurses designed to confront implicit bias. She called it the Ben Walsh Protocol. The simulation forced nurses to make triage decisions with limited information, while a clock ticked down, deliberately stripping away insurance status as a data point. David Chen had implemented it quietly, and it was now a required course for all emergency department staff. The surprise was this: the data showed that in the 6 months after the Ben Walsh Protocol was implemented, the average wait time disparity between insured and uninsured patients at Mercy General had vanished. It was the first hospital in the region to achieve that statistic. The policy change was necessary, but the human change, the retraining of instinct, was what made it real. The scandal at Mercy General became a national case study in healthcare ethics. It demonstrated that EMTALA, while powerful on paper, was only as strong as the culture of the hospital implementing it. It showed that financial pressures could distort care at the most critical point of contact. But it also proved that change was possible, not just from lawsuits or legislation, but from the relentless focus of a parent, the leaked documents of a desperate nurse, and the application of shame and capital in equal measure. Liam Walsh achieved what he wanted. No other parent would face what he did in that waiting room, at least not in that hospital. The system was repaired, but it remained fragile, requiring constant vigilance from the new patient advocate office he funded. The story ends not with a perfect solution, but with a hard-won improvement, a testament to the fact that sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom victory, but like a revised training manual, a dismantled policy, and a child who gets to go home healthy. This is where the documentary's core promise is fulfilled. We saw the shocking hook, a father denied care. We followed the escalation, the hidden wealth, the systemic exposure, the legal brinkmanship. And now we arrive at the payoff, concrete change born from chaos. The reckoning was public, painful, and productive, but the work, as it always does, continues. So what does the story of Liam Walsh and Mercy General Hospital actually prove? That a single person with enough money and motive can force a broken system to bend? Perhaps. But the more unsettling and more hopeful truth is that the system was always capable of bending. The policies were just choices. The delays were just decisions. The $35 million didn't change the rules. It simply removed the excuse for not following the ones that already existed. The law, EMTALA, was passed in 1986. For nearly 4 decades, it has technically guaranteed that no one in America should be turned away from an emergency room for lack of insurance. Yet last year, insurers still denied 31% of emergency claims, and patients in the poorest neighborhoods waited 10% longer for ambulances. The gap between the law on the books and the reality in the waiting room is where countless quiet tragedies unfold, unseen by directors and donors. Liam and Ben's story went viral because of its dramatic, almost cinematic twist, the hidden benefactor revealed. But for every story that catches the light, there are thousands that remain in the dark, where the parent in the worn hoodie is just a parent in a worn hoodie, and the only thing rushing to their aid is more time on the clock. This leaves us with a lingering question that extends far beyond one hospital wing. Does basic human care require a shocking public scandal to be guaranteed? Or can we build a system where dignity isn't a contingency, but a precondition? The reform at Mercy General stands as a blueprint, but also a warning. It shows that change is possible when accountability is forced into the light, by whistleblowers, by the press, by relentless advocacy, but it shouldn't require a $35 million lever to pry open a door that was never legally supposed to be closed. We leave this story not at an end, but at a checkpoint. The Walsh family wing is open. The Ben Walsh Protocol is training new nurses. The independent audit is public, but the fundamental tension between healthcare as a human right and healthcare as a revenue stream remains the defining battle in hospitals across the country tonight. If this documentary has shown anything, it's that the most critical triage happens long before a patient sees a doctor. It happens in boardrooms, in policy memos, and in the split-second judgments of people under immense pressure. The real emergency is the one we've normalized. Your attention to this story is part of the antidote. Awareness is the first form of accountability, so if you want to see more deep dives into the systems that shape our lives, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. And remember, the next time you hear about a law designed to protect the vulnerable, ask yourself not just what it says, but what it allows to happen in the silence between its lines. Thank you for watching.